Some people say, oh, you just want to belong to some kind of special group or whatever. You want 5 minutes of fame. Well, I'm sorry, I hate to tell you this. This isn't a group that you want to belong to.
Whether it's a need for attention or just plain delusions, researchers David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins look for signs.
That's the number one thing you first look at. Are these people crazy or what? And this has not been the case.
There's no litmus test. You plug in your little finger into a machine and say, oh yeah, abductee, non-abductee. There's nothing like that. We have to ask a lot of questions and spend a lot of time with people. They have to have a certain kind of stability.
But in extreme circumstances, even the most rational of people can be pushed to the edge.
At the time, I had a couple of suicidal thoughts here and there. I wasn't carrying them out, of course, but nevertheless, I was thinking about it, and I didn't want to do that to the children.
Once. And it was after going out in the media. And I was, I felt like my whole life was gone.
Some abductees look to traditional therapy for help in dealing with their struggle, but have a difficult time finding doctors to be open.
I had a therapist laugh at me. I've had quite an experience with therapists.
One can be very hurt by going to the wrong person. And it's why we're trying to get material out to therapists to at least allow the possibility of this being a real factor in someone's life.
I think anybody that this has happened to needs help. It just blows everything out of the water that you've ever thought the world to be.
One of the things that abduction interferes with is relationships. Revealing you are an abductee can be a very delicate process.
I was rather worried that if I didn't broach the topic with him, we were going to have a strange event like I had had with the guy I was seeing just before him, and he would bolt.
I think it was very early on. She asked me how I felt about UFOs and whether I believed in them or not, and she told me she did. And later on, she told me more.
You get to know somebody and you like them and whatever, and bang, I'm a UFO abductee, and they sit there and their jaw falls on the floor and they say, okay, well, see you around, sweetheart,
I don't know if he actually believed it, but he was willing to tolerate it.
I thought, wow, this is kind of, out there. I've never met anybody that thought they were an abductee. So, but, I felt very strongly about Sarah at the time, and I felt that she was extremely sane and very, very, very intelligent. So, I thought that if she had a feeling about this sort of thing, then there was something behind it.
And they must deal with the possibility of their loved ones suffering a similar fate.
I would love them to see something so they understood what I go through. But at the same time, I don't want to have them to go through what I went through.
And some of these memories are painful for her, and they come to the surface every once in a while. Sometimes I don't know how to console her, so sometimes I feel helpless.
The parent-child relationship is even more complex.
I didn't want kids. I want to subject him to this.
I have a lot of reservations around having kids because of that.
The abduction phenomenon is intergenerational. That is to say, a person is an abductee because their mother or their father was an abductee.
Karina had to face this head-on when her 3-year-old daughter recounted a strange visit.
She said, then they took me up and somewhere, and I was in this room, and then this pumpkin head man came in, and she said, I'm really scared of him. I don't like him. He's mean and he hurts me. And I said, who's the pumpkin head man? And she says, well, he says he's the doctor. This is something that my son made when he was between 9 and 10 years old. At school, they had gotten some plaster, and they asked the children to make whatever they wanted to with this plaster. And this is what my son made in school. And that's when the teacher actually phoned me and said, you know, we need to talk.
Karina sometimes felt unwillingly compelled to involve the children in odd outings.
In my head, I would hear, get the children ready. And I have a lot of guilt with this, so I'm sorry, this is really difficult for me. But I'm sorry. So I would take the kids and wrap little blankets around them. And I would just get in the vehicle, and I didn't know where we were going. And I would find myself driving in some location that I didn't even know where we were going or where we were headed. I had no way of stopping it. We couldn't talk to anyone about this because people were going to think that we were crazy, and they were going to try and take us apart from each other. And so I said, you know, we can only talk about it within the three of us. And when you see that fear in their eyes and that aloneness that they have of dealing with this stuff, that's the hardest part for me. And
even now, as an adult, Karina's daughter finds it difficult to speak about.
I don't like talking about it. I don't like listening to it. I get angry and stuff.
Both she and Karina believe they have suffered great losses because of the aliens, including even pregnancy.
I just knew that something was wrong, and I had an ultrasound done, and everything was gone. There was no fetus, no sac, there was nothing. Everything was gone, and I don't remember losing a fetus or anything.
I've had several miscarriages in the past 2 years. Like, I'll be pregnant for 4 months, and then all of a sudden I'll wake up and it'll be flat and it'll be gone and there'll be no blood, nothing. And I'll go get an ultrasound and it won't even show that I was pregnant. And the doctors can't explain it because I went for an ultrasound a couple weeks earlier and it showed that I was pregnant. So I called my mom and I started crying. I was like, they took my baby.
Although Peniche's children have no memories of abductions themselves, they feel her experiences have deeply affected them.
Yeah, there is a lot of anger in there in regards to how capable she was of being a mother, you know, during that time when she was actually really, really struggling, especially with a lot of health issues. And, you know, it was really difficult for her that my sister and I, you know, ended up getting shut out quite a bit, quite often, because she wasn't able to cope.
I ended up with a bladder infection. I had unexplained rashes on my skin, little red bumps. I had cracks and sores on the inside of my mouth, and vomiting, nausea.
We ended up waking up with bruises and scratches and burn marks.
How could I burn myself in my sleep? I don't know.
In order to deal with this physical aftermath, abductees like Sarah try to make sense of how the beings could make them suffer so.
The scientists that study animals out in the wild and they might put a tag in them or put a tag on them, and they're doing it for the animal's good. Now I have this empathy for those creatures because I think that's the gulf that separates us from these beings that are visiting us and doing that. I think they have their own reasons for doing it, and I think that they look at us like we look at those animals.
They're not mapping our defenses, they're not interested in our computers. They're not just experimenting oddly to see what makes us tick, but they're trying to produce a mix of themselves and ourselves.
This was something from another world.
You had no right to hide the truth like that.
We are not gonna let them get you again. I'm scared.
They've taken us, and they're going to come for us again.
This is a threat to our country of unparalleled proportions. No!